Good morning, everyone. I think we'll wait another minute or two, let a few more people file in. We are excited to get started with our workforce development series this morning. So we'll just hang on just a few more seconds before we get started. All right, good morning, everybody. I am Becky Hauschild, and I am the Communication Director for Midwest Manufacturers Association. And we are super excited this morning to continue our workforce development series. And this is August 28th, 2024. Our topic today is the recent changes and updates to the Fair Labor Standards Act. Now, we're going to cover today changes to exempt and non-exempt employees, overtime rules, and updates to minimum salary for exempt employees. So it's going to be really interesting, and I thank you all for joining us. Our presenter today is Ashley Drews, and she's the HR Director at Pro Resources in Detroit Lakes. She's worked in HR for almost a decade. Prior to joining Pro Resources, she worked in insurance and workers' compensation. She has certification from the Society for Human Resources Management, as well as mental health first aid responder, and is also an Everything DiSC Certified Practitioner. If you're in HR, maybe you know what that means. At Pro Resources, she is responsible for managing clients and employee relations, ensuring compliance with state and federal laws, managing client human resource initiatives, and everything from recruitment to performance management. Ashley has her Bachelor of Science in management and a minor in marketing from the University of Minnesota. So thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us today and being our presenter.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have you all here and learning about some new law updates and the FLSA salaried exemption status here. All right. So thank you for joining. As I mentioned, we'll just go ahead and get started. All right. So the Fair Labor Standards Act executed the salary exemption update in two phases. So the first phase took place July 1, so a month and a half-ish ago. And that update took us to 43,888. Previously, the salary exemption threshold was 35,888. So a little bit of a jump. So any salaried employees that are exempt from overtime must be making that 43,888 per year, or 848. Sorry, too many numbers for my brain this morning. Holy cow, 848 per week. So employees who earn less than this amount and are paid on a salary basis are eligible for overtime pay for any hours worked over 40 per week. That number, that salary update in July, if you have anyone that's highly compensated, it also took that number up to 132,964 per year. So this second phase is coming up in January. So as an update for January, that new amount will be 58,656. So a pretty big jump from the number in July. So that salary threshold for any salaried worker who is exempt from overtime, they'll need to be making 58,656 per year, or 1,128 per week. So employees who earn less than this amount and are paid on a salary basis would then be eligible for overtime for any hours worked over 40 in a week. And then that highly compensated rate also jumps to 151,164 per year. All right, so exemption criteria. Employees who are paid on a salary basis must meet certain exemption criteria in order to be exempt from overtime pay. So this law update applies to the executive, administrative, and professional exemptions. If this is kind of the first time you're hearing about exemption criteria, or maybe it's been a while since you've reviewed the criteria against your salaried employee's job duties. Now would be a good time to revisit that information with your HR manager or to contact Pro here. So just to kind of give you some baseline information, this is not the full exemption criteria, but just to get your cogs turning, that administrative exemption, employee's primary duty must be the performance of office or non-manual work directly related to management or general business operations of the employer or its customers. And the employee's primary duty includes the exercise of discretion and independent judgment with respect to matters of significance. And then the professional exemption, those are the two I get the most questions about, so that's why I added them here. The employee's primary duty must be for the performance of work requiring advanced knowledge, predominantly intellectual in character or nature, which requires the consistent exercise of discretion and judgment. So an advanced knowledge must be in a field of science or learning, and the advanced knowledge must be customarily acquired by a prolonged course of specified intellectual instruction, basically meaning you have to have continuing education for that type of professional exemption. All right, so what are we to do? We have this huge jump in salary exemption dollars. How do we figure out how this affects us? Well, number one, we want to update the affected employees, or we have our options here. So our option number one is to update the affected employee salary amount to meet the new threshold. Of course, if the budget allows and if, that is the direction that you maybe were heading anyway. Second option is to change the employee's pay type to be based on hours worked instead of on salary. So basically changing that employee from a salaried employee to an hourly employee. The third option is to leave the salary amount as is, but then to pay the employee for overtime for any hours worked over 40 within the week. Okay, so those are our options, but how do we do this? In order to prepare for a decision, we want to make a list of all of our employees that are being paid on salary. If you haven't updated for July, you'll want to start with the $35,568 and have your report essentially be allocated for any employees making a salary between the $35,568 and $58,656. If you did update for July, feel free to use the $43,888. You'll need to determine if the employee meets the exemption criteria. So again, we'll want to take a look at that employee's job duties, compare it with the exemption criteria, and first of all, just make sure that they meet the criteria to be a salaried employee to begin with. Then we'll want to analyze the actual hours worked to determine if the potential financial impact of switching to an hourly or non-exempt, is congruent with what the company is wanting to do. All right, so looking at our options and how this trickles down to employees. Let's review. So the hourly rate calculation. Certainly you can take that employee's salary and simply divide their salary by 40 hours per week. Or if you know that employee normally works a fair bit more than 40 hours, but they're currently not getting overtime for it, you may want to factor in that employee's estimated overtime. If, you think that will happen in the future as well. Incentives, bonuses, some companies that we work with, they provide incentives or bonuses for, only their salaried employees versus their hourly employees. So we want to determine if that will impact those employees at all. Benefits. Some companies have different benefits packages for hourly employees versus salaried employees. So we'll want to consider if that plays into this decision at all. And then time tracking. When you take a salaried employee and switch them to an hourly employee, now they need to punch in and out. So do we have a software system that can manage that? Do we have, the configuration and the technology to be able to submit or take that time and then submit it into payroll in an effective and time efficient manner. Some more impacts to consider here. Employee morale. I mean, there can be some prestige associated with being a salaried employee, and some employees may consider it a demotion to, punch in and out when they've maybe been salaried for 5 years. So you'll want to consider the impacts to your company culture prior to making that switch to hourly. Now, I will say, if you've done an assessment and taken a look at the exemption criteria and determined, this employee probably shouldn't have been salaried anyway, that's a pretty easy conversation. It's hey, we took a look at this because the laws came out, so we wanted to make sure we were in compliance. Turns out we probably shouldn't have had you be a salaried employee anyway. So we are going to have to switch you to hourly. It's a little bit easier to swallow in that regard. Another impact is flexibility. Being a salaried employee allows for certain flexibility, which sometimes works in an employer's favor, and it sometimes works in the employee's favor, right? So when an employer has to pay overtime for hours that are worked over 40 in a week, it can take away their advantage to the salary, equation. And there is even more. Advance notice. So employers should provide advance notice when switching an employee's pay type. This includes requirements like punching in and out, meal and rest breaks. By the way, this is also required in Minnesota, called a wage statement form. So if that hasn't been filled out in the past, now is a good time to revisit that as well. And then company equipment policies. So some companies that we work with limit the use of company laptops or access to their system after a certain time of day to prevent hourly employees from working, more than their 40 hours. So you'll want to take a look at any technology or equipment policies that you have in correlation with the salary updates and how they may have impacted the company. All right. Any questions on the Fair Labor Standards Act before we move on? I have a couple other upcoming employment law changes that I just wanted to relay to this group, as it seemed timely. And if you think of them after, that's completely fine too. I'm pretty easy. You can feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt anytime or pop a question in the chat. All right, so we'll move on. The pregnancy and parental leave, this law changed last year, but there have been some additional expansions to it. So employers are required to maintain coverage, so group policies, group health insurance, for that employee while they're on leave. So basically, they can't make the employee pay for the entire portion of the policy while they're on leave. The employer still has to pay their cost. And then the 12-week entitlement to Pregnancy and Parental Leave Act may not be reduced by any paid or unpaid leave the employee takes for prenatal care or medical appointments. So basically, if you have an employee that, maybe they have a high-risk pregnancy and they need to go to the doctor once a week, we can't reduce that 12-week benefit for those appointments. All right, pay ranges in job postings. This is effective January 1, 2025. So just in a few short months here, any employers with 30 or more employees at one or more sites in Minnesota, they must post a pay range in their job posting. So when you have an open position and you're actively hiring and recruiting for that position, you will now be required to post the pay range in that job posting. So the pay range cannot be open-ended. If there's not a range, a fixed pay rate must be listed, and it must be based on a quote good faith estimate. So essentially, we can no longer put starting at $11 an hour. We have to put, $11 to $16 depending on experience. And then a general description of all the benefits and other compensation, including health or retirement benefits, must also be listed in the job posting. And then these requirements apply to any solicitation intended to recruit job applicants for a specific available position. So this includes electronic or hard copy postings that include qualifications for desired applicants. So basically any job posting is done electronically nowadays in some form or another. So you'll want to take a look at your prior practices and how you've been doing this, and make sure that effective January 1, you're in compliance with this law. This is going to be a big one, and I have a feeling they may be checking this. All right, saliva drug testing is now permitted. So if you haven't heard, you can now be eligible, or your employees can now be tested via their saliva for drug and alcohol and cannabis testing. This must still be conducted in accordance with the written testing policy. So basically, your testing policy must align with your practices. It does not require the utilization of a testing facility or a laboratory or the customary chain of command procedures, this is huge. Anyone, maybe I'm the only HR nerd here, but anyone that's been in HR for any length of time knows that, when you do a drug test, you have to have the proper chain of command. It needs to be at a certified testing facility, and it must follow very strict protocol. So now they can be tested on site at your location via saliva. All right. The Minnesota Earn Sick and Safe Time has been something that we probably all have been thinking about this last year, at least myself. So there's been some updates to the law. Earn Sick and Safe Time can now be used to make arrangements or attend funeral services or a memorial, or to address financial or legal matters that arise after a family member's death. So basically, we can use this as bereavement pay now. And Earn Sick and Safe Time may now be used in the same increments of time that the employee is paid, with a 15-minute minimum and a 4-hour maximum. Prior to this law expansion, it just had to be used with the smallest increment of time that an employer's timekeeping system allowed. They've now changed this to that 15-minute minimum and a 4-hour maximum. So can no longer, have an 8-hour, must be used in 8-hour increments kind of policy. If you have that, you'll want to take a look at it. All right. Just want to give a brief summary of how we help. We have resources for human resources, benefits, payroll, safety, well-being, workers' compensation. We have a human resources information system, a job posting platform, time and attendance tracking, and we help with PTO and ESST tracking. So we also have experts in each of these areas. So we really do have a one-stop shop for all things HR. All right, we have a few minutes left here for questions. What can I answer for you?
So in the chat, the one question that was written was, is if the PowerPoint presentation would be available.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Be happy to send it to you. If I just send it to you, are you able to send it out to the group?
Yep, we'll send it out to everybody that registered, and
Perfect.
they'll get the link to the recording, and then I'll send the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, here is my information, and Allison is on the call as well, but she's driving, so I'm not going to make her talk unless she wants to. But she is our HR business consultant in your area. I work out of our Detroit Lakes office, and our team is here to help. I was just at a client this morning and heard from one of their employees that our team is just so helpful and so good at getting back to them about their questions. So if you're needing some support in that area, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to help.
So is there any other questions? I mean, we covered a lot here.
We did. This is a lot. And yes, of course, we'll send the PowerPoint out, and I can, my email is here, and so is Allison. So certainly feel free, if there's something that came up afterwards, we're happy to help.
So if we back up to the start of the presentation and those changes in numbers that you were talking about, from 35,000 to like 58,000.
Yeah. Yep. So
that is,
let's see.
yeah, this one. Could
Yep.
you go over this one again? This one I got confused on.
Yeah, sure. So the Fair Labor Standards Act issued the salary exemption update in 2 phases. Phase 1 is already passed. Phase 2 is coming up on January 1. So this update will bump the salary minimum, the salary exemption minimum, I should say, to $58,656. So the minimum amount that someone who is a salaried employee and exempt can be paid is $58,656.
Okay, and it used to be 35.
It did, yep.
That's
It
a
used to be
big jump.
35. It's huge, yeah.
Big jump.
And I should mention to this group, this is currently in litigation. So we don't know what's going to happen between now and January, but as of right now, we have to prepare for the law as it's written.
Right. Okay. So another question I had is, when you're posting job positions, said they would probably be watching. You think they're going to be paying attention to?
I have a feeling they may be watching that one. Yeah. I've seen it happen in other states. There's several other states that have the same law. And I've seen, I refer to myself as an HR nerd, so I'm not afraid to say that I get email updates on legal cases that happen. And I've seen some other litigation come through for salary ranges and job postings in other states. So I wouldn't be surprised, although I can't, guarantee that that they might be watching this.
And who's they?
The Department of Labor.
Okay. That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
So can they impose some kind of discipline if it's
they can, yeah, they can impose fines.
Fines, okay.
Yeah.
And do they have a history of doing that?
I mean, not in Minnesota, of course, but there has been, I'm trying to think, I think 1 or 2 in other states, that in some other states have had this law in effect for, a few years, a handful of years. So we're going to be pretty new at this. I think Minnesota, if holds true to other laws, they'll probably give us some sort of grace period. But, I would say by spring, you're going to want to be posting job pay ranges in job postings.
Okay. So Courtney asks, are you aware of any exemptions to this new salary requirement for nonprofit organizations?
There is not any exemption for nonprofit. This is everybody.
It is. Okay.
But that being said, I mean, you can certainly have a salaried employee be paid a salary that's less than that amount, than the 58,000. But you'd have to pay them overtime for any hours worked over 40. And in order to know that they're working hours that are over 40, you have to have them punch in and out. So if they're non-exempt, you have to have time records. Meaning they have to punch in and out when they get there, when they take lunch, and when they leave.
Okay, and another question in regards to the job postings.
Yeah.
Do we just have to list what we offer for benefits, or do we have to list what the cost is?
Just what you list. You don't have to list the cost. I mean, because it's going to vary, right? I mean, depending on if you have a health plan that's age banded or not. So there's a lot of variables there. There would be no way to list the cost.
Those listings are going to get a lot longer.
They are. They are. Yeah. And much more standardized too.
Yeah. Yeah, there will be no more short and sweet. That's for sure.
No. So, I mean, as a recruitment tip, it's going to be harder to catch the eye of prospective job hunters. So we'll need to get creative. All right, any other questions or anything else I can help with?
Don't be afraid to unmute and come out and ask
Yeah.
away. I'm cool with that.
All right, wonderful. Well, I'll pop my email up here and Allison's email up here one last time, and we'll certainly send out this PowerPoint presentation. Don't hesitate to reach out. More than happy to help, as is Allison. And thank you guys for being open and receptive to hearing about the law changes. We love being able to do this with the Minnesota Manufacturers Association.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ashley. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.